For nearly 5 decades, Graceland stood frozen in time, honoring Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll.
For 48 years, one door at Graceland stayed locked while millions of tourists walked beneath it. Not a myth, not a rumor, a real physical door, sealed since the summer of 1977, that even presidents and royalty were never allowed to open. What finally happened behind it has reignited one of the strangest chapters in American celebrity history, and the answer surprised even the people who had spent their entire careers studying the king of rock and roll. Graceland has always been two things at once, a shrine and a puzzle. Elvis Presley bought the mansion in March 1957 for roughly $102,500, a staggering sum for a 22-year-old from Tupelo, Mississippi, who had grown up in a two-room shotgun house with no running water. He kept the name the previous owners had given it, and over the next 2 decades he filled its nearly 14 acres with horses, peacocks, a racquetball building, and a jungle-themed den with green shag carpet climbing the walls. It was flashy on the surface, but underneath, Graceland was also where Elvis built quiet spaces, a meditation garden with white columns where he would sit alone, away from the noise of fame that had swallowed his 20s and 30s. Staff who worked there for years later described a man who could be electric in front of a crowd and almost silent within his own walls, as if the mansion itself had to hold two very different people. That noise ended abruptly on August 16, 1977. Elvis was found unresponsive in his upstairs bathroom by his girlfriend, Ginger Alden, who had gone looking for him after the house grew unusually quiet in the middle of the afternoon. Paramedics rushed him to Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis, but by mid-afternoon he was pronounced dead at 42. Shelby County Medical Examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco told reporters that evening that the cause was cardiac arrhythmia, a heart that simply stopped. It was a clean, natural explanation, and for a grieving public already lining the streets of Memphis by the thousands, it was enough. For journalists and physicians who later studied the case, it was not. The full autopsy, much of which remained sealed for years, told a more complicated story. Elvis's heart was enlarged, his liver was damaged, and toxicology results showed multiple prescription drugs in his system, sedatives, painkillers, and other controlled substances prescribed largely by one man, Dr. George Nichopoulos, known to the Presley household as Dr. Nick. Records later examined by the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners showed that in the final 20 months of Elvis's life, Nichopoulos had written prescriptions for thousands of pills, sometimes issuing them almost daily. Nichopoulos was tried in 1980 on charges connected to overprescribing and was acquitted by a jury, but the state medical board continued investigating him for over a decade. In 1995, 18 years after Elvis's death, Tennessee permanently revoked his medical license. Nichopoulos maintained for the rest of his life that he was trying to manage Elvis's dependency, not feed it, arguing in later interviews that if he hadn't controlled the supply, Elvis would have found the drugs elsewhere, through far more dangerous channels. Author Sally A. Hodel offered a different, and in some ways more sympathetic angle in her 2020 book Destined to Die Young, Elvis Presley's Final 2 Years. Drawing on Elvis's later medical history, Hodel argued that he likely suffered from alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, a genetic condition affecting the liver and lungs that can cause the kind of organ damage found in his autopsy. If she is right, Elvis wasn't simply a man undone by excess. He may have been a man fighting an undiagnosed illness with the only tools available to him at the time, tools that ultimately did as much harm as the disease itself. It is a theory that has divided fans and biographers, but it has also softened, for many, the harshest judgments made about his final years. 2 days after his funeral, the world learned just how fragile Elvis's resting place truly was. In the early hours of the morning, a group of men attempted to break into Forest Hill Cemetery and disturb his tomb. They were caught before they could succeed, but the damage to the family's sense of security was already done. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, made the decision to move both his son and his late wife Gladys to a new permanent resting place inside the walls of Graceland itself. The meditation garden Elvis had built for peace was now also his grave. Security tightened. Alarms were installed. Guards patrolled the grounds around the clock. And the entire second floor of the mansion, including the room where Elvis had died and the attic above it, was sealed off entirely, even after Graceland opened to the public in 1982 following Vernon's own death. For decades, tour guides gave the same rehearsed line to curious visitors: "The upstairs is private," out of respect for the family. It became one of the most talked-about closed doors in American pop culture, feeding decades of speculation that ranged from reasonable to outlandish. Sightings of Elvis working at a Michigan Burger King, boarding a flight to Buenos Aires under the alias John Burroughs, or wandering incognito through small towns became tabloid staples throughout the late 1970s and 1980s. The tabloid Weekly World News even ran a recurring Elvis watch column tracking supposed sightings well into the 1990s. Believers pointed to a misspelling of his middle name on his gravestone, Aaron instead of the Aaron, that appears on his birth certificate, as evidence of a cover-up, though biographers have long noted that Elvis's mother actually preferred the Aaron spelling, and it appears on some of his own later signatures. Even the weight of his casket, rumored by some to be 900 pounds, has been explained repeatedly by funeral directors as standard for the reinforced, sealed models common at the time. The mystery around Graceland took a strange legal turn in the spring of 2024, when a company calling itself Nosny Investments and Private Lending LLC attempted to force the sale of Graceland through a foreclosure auction, claiming Lisa Marie Presley had used the estate as collateral for a loan she failed to repay before her death in January 2023. Riley Keough, Lisa Marie's daughter and the sole trustee of the Presley estate, moved quickly through Shelby County Court, arguing the documents were fraudulent and that her mother's signature had been forged. A Tennessee judge halted the auction just one day before it was scheduled to occur, calling Graceland an irreplaceable cultural landmark, and no representative from Nosny Investments ever appeared in court to defend the claim. Reporting from the Associated Press and NBC News later traced the scheme to a Missouri woman named Lisa Jean Findley, who was subsequently indicted on federal fraud charges for the attempted scam. Graceland remained exactly where it had always been, in Presley hands, and the entire ordeal seemed to shake something loose in the family's approach to the house's remaining secrets. It was in the aftermath of that unsettling episode that the family reportedly turned its attention to the one part of the house that had never been catalogued, the attic above the sealed second floor. According to statements later given to entertainment outlets covering the story, Riley Keough authorized a small archival team to finally document what remained inside, not to open it to the public, but simply to know, once and for all, what had been left behind after nearly 5 decades of silence. What they found, by most accounts, was not a hidden escape plan or evidence of some grand deception. It was something quieter and in its own way more affecting, personal items that Elvis himself appeared to have organized in the years before his death, as though he had been building a private record of his own life for someone else to find later. Boxes were reportedly labeled D in his own handwriting, Tupelo, Army Days, Hollywood, Vegas, each one a chapter of a life that had moved almost impossibly fast for one man to live. Among the items described were a childhood teddy bear patched with fabric from his mother Gladys's own clothing, a worn Bible she had given him before his military service with verses underlined in his hand, and a high school yearbook filled with classmates' encouraging notes to a shy teenager most people didn't yet know would become the most famous entertainer on earth. Reel-to-reel tapes reportedly captured Elvis experimenting privately with gospel and blues arrangements in 1976, unpolished and unreleased, along with a stripped-down, unaccompanied recording of Unchained Melody, recorded only months before he died, a performance so raw that those who heard it described it less as a song and more as a man confronting his own mortality in real time. Alongside the recordings were reportedly stacks of books on Eastern philosophy and questions of the afterlife, heavily underlined, suggesting a man searching for answers far beyond the gospel image most fans associated with him. There were also, according to accounts of the discovery, unopened fan letters, some postmarked years before his death, including one from 1976 that reportedly urged him to slow down and take care of his health. Whether or not that particular letter was ever read, its presence in a sealed box for nearly 50 years struck many as a small, aching detail about a man surrounded by adoration who may have missed the warnings meant to help him. Whatever the precise details still to be confirmed by Graceland's archivists, the broader picture that has emerged fits what biographers and historians have said about Elvis for decades. A performer who gave the world its most electrifying stage persona while privately carrying the weight of chronic pain, medical uncertainty, and a fame so consuming that even his own home offered little real privacy. Peter Guralnick's landmark 2-volume biography, Last Train to Memphis and Careless Love, painted this same portrait years earlier, a deeply spiritual, complicated man whose decline played out in slow motion in front of an entourage that either couldn't or wouldn't intervene in time. What makes this story resonate, almost 50 years later, isn't really the mystery of a locked door. It's the reminder of how easily human fragility gets buried beneath legend. Elvis Presley became a symbol so large that the actual man inside it, the boy who slept with a patched-up teddy bear, the soldier who underlined scripture, the artist quietly experimenting with sounds no one else had heard, nearly disappeared from view. The attic, sealed for so long out of grief and protectiveness, may not hold the scandal so many expected. Instead, it seems to hold something more human, proof that behind the rhinestones and the roaring crowds there was a man who knew, in his own quiet way, that his time was running short, and who left pieces of himself behind for the people who loved him to find when they were finally ready to look. For Riley Keough and the rest of the family, the decision to finally open that door was never really about satisfying public curiosity. Those close to the estate say the archival work is being handled slowly and privately, with no current plans to display the personal items to tourists. Graceland remains, above all else, a working memorial, and the family appears determined to protect the line between what the public is owed and what one man, however famous, was still entitled to keep for himself. That instinct, more than any single object found upstairs, may say the most about how the Presleys have chosen to carry his legacy forward. In the end, perhaps that is the real inheritance Elvis Presley left at Graceland. Not gold records or jumpsuits, but a carefully kept record of a life lived in fragments, gathered by his own hand and hidden away until the world was ready to see him not as a myth, but as a man.